So, who is this guy? I'm Chris Paul. Not that Chris Paul. That feels a little loud. There you go. I'd like to have his athletic skill, but I'm afraid if he heard me talking, he'd be like, no, not me. That's actually me with my family. I've got 4 kids, all relatively grown. Left to right, my son Joseph speaks 3 different languages, teaches Spanish up in Kokomo. Myself, my daughter, lives in Honduras. Then my wife, my youngest son Nathaniel, who is also a bit of a giant. And then on your left, my oldest son Matthew and his wife Erica, who live up in Noblesville. So that's, the coolest thing that we have is the relationships around us. So that's me. Anyway, we're talking about AWS for beginners. And the 3 broad categories that Amazon has as services in this space are networking, compute services, and storage. A lot of services underneath that, and that doesn't even begin to talk about the wealth of value that they can add to an organization, but those are the 3. We're going to start by talking about Lightsail. Lightsail is a service that AWS offers that is basically your very beginner. If you want to get into AWS and set up a server and get running, that is the first thing that you can do. It's easy. It's their most expensive server option, but it'll get you started. You can play around a little bit. We'll then dig into some of the technologies underlying Lightsail and get into actually the technologies that AWS provides. We'll talk about networking. We'll talk about a little bit about identity and access management, not too much. And then we'll talk about their compute services. We're going to close out by talking about cost management and referring you to some good documentation. So let's go ahead and dive in. This will be, try that again, basically a hands-on presentation. And I'm going to take you back to, where's my mouse? Back to your AWS screen. When you first log into AWS, you pretty much get their management console, and Lightsail is under their compute services. So we'll start that, and first thing is we're going to create an instance. It's a server instance, virtual service. And when I create an instance, I've got a few different options. I can choose a Linux server or a Windows server, and then I can also choose servers that have some of the platforms already installed to start working with. For this, we'll just go ahead and create a Windows server. And you'll notice this, on Lightsail, you have 2016 available. Later on, you'll see that Amazon also has more recent images available as well. Their pricing is relatively straightforward. You can choose the price based on the requirements of your server. And I'll go ahead and choose this $20 a month one. One thing to note is they have a free tier service. When you are working with AWS for the first 6 months, there's a lot of things that they offer completely free. So you'll see free tier service offered on several of the items. So this one is actually just a first month free, but I'm going to go ahead and set up a server. I can put in my instance name. Key value tags are relatively important when you're dealing with AWS because they allow you to track your costs. They allow you to do reporting based on these tags, and every service in AWS has tags associated with it. So you definitely want to get used to using your key value tags. So that, for instance, if you want to track all of the costs related to HR, if I want to track all of the costs related to this presentation, everything I do with this presentation, I can put key value tags and track specifically those costs. So those are kind of important, and I'll just go ahead and put cost center, IndyAWS, right? And create an instance. So we've gone into Lightsail and we've created an instance. That instance is being provisioned as we speak. It takes less than 5 minutes, and you've got a virtual server up and running. It doesn't take a whole lot longer than that to create your account to begin with. So this is pretty good. And what will be happening now, let's see, once this comes up, as you'll see, this server is now already running. Now, it's not done provisioning it because one of the things that they do, one of the last things they do is they set up the authentication and the password. So since I've already got an account here, I can connect through RDP. It knows that it's me, so it won't require me to log in. If I click this right now, it's going to come up as administrator and ask me for my password because it hasn't provisioned that yet. So it takes just a moment, and if you're doing this and you go show default password, it's not available yet, within 5 minutes that's available and you can move on. So let's talk about some of the technologies underlying it. Of course, you've got your storage, and you can, in Lightsail, add additional disks to your servers. They can be in the range of terabytes if you like. They have metrics that you can track your servers. Now this one, there aren't any metrics available because it's in the process of provisioning. But we'll talk about that a little bit. The network, it automatically creates a public and a private IP address. The private IP address, so that when you're working with other services such as databases, you can interact with those. You'll notice it sets up a firewall automatically. So I can go in and edit the rules. I can add different protocols to be able to interact with that server over the public network. They have automatically added SSH, HTTP, and remote desktop. You can create snapshots, so I can, if I need to make changes to my server, I'm not entirely sure that they're going to do what I want, create a snapshot, make all of the changes I want. If it doesn't do exactly what I want, I can revert back to the snapshot. So once again, the tags. So you can see the tags are listed here. A history when you created the server, any changes you make on a server level, and then finally you can delete those, right? So let's go to connect. It now has my password, a nice, strong password. Got it. But I can connect using RDP, and through their website, it will bring me into that server, and I'm up and running. And logging me in. So that's Lightsail. If you ever want to, if you're new to AWS and want to just get in and start playing, start with Lightsail. One of the things that's important here, you notice that the servers were X number of dollars per month. It doesn't have to cost you that much. I set up a server, it's $20 a month, but they're charging me on an hourly rate. So I can come in at any time. I can stop that server. They charge me less when it's stopped. They charge a really small amount for snapshots to hold on your account, or you can simply terminate that, and all you're going to pay for is what you used. Okay? Any questions about that before we move forward? Yes?
You said that it's $20 a month, but, it's supposed to be on how much you use, is that right? You said it was $20 a month, but it could be more because you're using more and doing other functions, is
So
that right?
that particular server, the max is $20 a month. But if I stop it in the next 2 hours, I'm going to end up paying 20 cents.
So the max is 20. Does that mean once it reaches 20, then?
No, that server, if I keep it running all month, it's 20 bucks.
I see. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, let's go ahead and move on. I'm going to head now, so we're going to leave LightSail and talk about some of the underlying services. First, let's talk about their virtual private cloud. So when you are in Amazon Web Services, one of the first things you're going to do outside of LightSail is you're going to set up a virtual private cloud. This is where all of your services interact with each other. If I've got servers that I need to interact, it is the network inside of your company. Everything from the gateway into your company is going to be in your virtual private cloud. This is where you're going to set up your subnets for your different departments, however you want to do that. And so we'll go ahead and set up a virtual private cloud for what we're doing. And I've got a couple created already. They allow you, and I don't remember the numbers, either 3 or 5 that are free, and then after that they charge you for the virtual private clouds. But I'm going to just call this one IndyAWS. The first thing it's going to ask me is for a CIDR block. And so if you're familiar with networking, you fully understand how that works. And we're going to create. So now I have a virtual private cloud in the AWS created, and that's ready for me to use. You've got information at the bottom about that. The first thing you do inside of a network is, of course, create a subnet. So I'm going to go ahead and create a subnet. I'm going to call this IndyAWS Public. Choose my VPC. So I'm going to choose the IndyAWS VPC. And then you'll notice it has availability zones. The way AWS works is each location that they have is an availability zone. So within our region, US East, it's the region I've got set up, there are several locations, different physical locations. And so if you're setting up services and you need things to be redundant, you need your services to be available 99.999, however you do that, you want to set up redundant services in different availability zones. And so a subnet is in a particular availability zone. And then once again, I've got my CIDR block again. So I'm going to go 192.168. And this has to be within the range of the virtual private cloud. So I'm actually going to put the same one, but do a 16-bit. And create that. And so we've got a subnet created somewhere down here. Here's our IndyAWS public. Okay? Yes?
What size did you put in for the VPC? Like a /8?
For the VPC, I put in a /16. Okay. Yep. So then on this one, I've got a /20.
Can you make sure you repeat the question?
I'm sorry. Yes. And the question was, what size did I put in for the VPC? So that was a 16, and then I put in a 20 for the subnet. Okay. So let's talk about security groups. And you're going to see this. Sure. There we go. I'm going to create a security group for us here. And in the AWS public again. I'll just copy that. And choose our virtual private cloud, create that. And what that does is now it gives me the ability to add inbound and outbound rules. So for this one, for instance, I want to add HTTP traffic and allow HTTP traffic. You can do custom, or you can just choose the traffic that they have available as a drop-down, and it will fill in the information. One thing of importance is the source. The source, you can do a custom source so that the IP address that's hitting this server could be your building, it could be your specific IP address, it could be any combination there, right? So I can choose anywhere, in which case I can get to this server on the public IP address from anywhere. I can choose my specific IP address so that, for instance, in fact, let's go ahead and make this one anywhere. And let's add remote desktop. So remote desktop, typically you don't want to open remote desktop up to the world. So you want that for your location. So that's where I would typically put my IP address, or put in an IP address specific to where I want to be able to access that. For this, I'm actually going to put anywhere and open this baby up to everyone and save that rule. So if you're watching on the internet and want to jump into that and can figure out, actually, if you remember that password, if you happen to capture that screen print while I was going through, you've got access to that server. Okay, don't do that. I don't recommend it. So now, I'm going to jump to compute services, because all we've done right now is create a network infrastructure for that, right? So if I go back to services, and you'll notice in compute, the very first one is EC2. That's their elastic compute services. It's where you create your servers in AWS. So you can see I've got 0 running instances. I've got nothing running. We're going to go ahead and launch an instance. And AWS has a wealth of images available. They have images that are base images that Amazon provides. They have images that the public provides. They have images that companies provide that you can pay for those on a monthly basis, right? Or actually, I think it's even down to an hourly basis. You can pay for those particular images, and that's in addition to the services that you're using from Amazon Web Services. So we're going to choose a base image, right? And I'm going to go ahead and put in Windows. And notice Microsoft Windows Server 2019 base image. I'm going to go ahead and choose that. If there's an additional cost for that, it would actually put that right here. So for this one, I'm paying for AWS's services behind the scenes. Then you have a type of server. So I've chosen my operating system with the image, whatever's in that image. For the type of server, you have a lot of options as far as, do you want memory intents, do you want compute intents, do you want storage intents, and then you can customize all of those. So you'll notice if I do filter by, I can drop that down, and you'll see microservices, general purpose, GPU, memory optimized, etc. Right? I'm going to choose just a general purpose. Also, the first letter is always the type. The second letter is the generation. So if you see like M3 versus M5, there might not be that much difference between them, except it's a newer generation server. So you're typically going to look for the newer generation servers. There are instances in which the older generation servers are less expensive, so depending on your requirements. So let's go ahead and next configure our details. So my network, once again, I'm going to choose our IndyAWS network so that it can communicate with anything here. Our subnet, I'm going to use the subnet that we created. The auto-assigned public IP, So if I want this available to the public, I can give it an IP right here. Now, there are a lot of different options for setting up public IP addresses. This is one, and this is simple, so we'll work through that. But know that there are a lot of different options in doing that, especially if you want to get into load balancing and things like that. So there's more there. Auto-assign public IP, I'm going to go ahead and say enable. Let's see, IAM role. This is relatively important, and I'm going to talk just a moment about Amazon's identity and access management. So they use policies, which the policies, thank you, are what give you access to specific resources. So if I set up a policy, I then tie that policy to a role. The role, I can group several policies, and that's what I'm looking at here, is I'm going to say this server is in the role S3 full access. So it has access to all of my storage system. But that's just what I named this role. You could have a role that does just about anything. They also have then users, and they have groups. You know what users are, groups. If you've got several users that are doing the same thing, put them in a group. You don't have to constantly be setting up security for those. Now, importantly, when you're setting up users, there's basically two types of users. There are physical people users, and then there are programmatic users. So if your systems inside your company are interacting with AWS, you would create basically an API user, and then those have access through keys. It is really important, number one, that you guard your keys. There's a temptation to put keys into config files. Those end up going up the chain into your source control systems. If people have access to those source control data, they've got access to your keys. If you want to owe Amazon $350,000 next month, I'll tell you how to do that. Publish your keys. There have been several instances of hackers going in and searching. They're searching source control repositories for keys because with AWS, and this is true with Azure as well, you have an incredible amount of power available to you. I can spin up as a company 100 servers in the matter of minutes with all the compute power I can possibly imagine. And if I am an evil hacker, I can go in and spin up Bitcoin services. I can mine Bitcoin on your account, make myself a boatload of money, and then you owe Amazon even more. So you have to be careful about that. The other thing is, how many of you have used multi-factor authentication? Okay, a few, not everybody. Go out and look at multi-factor authentication, and especially with something this important, where you can cost yourself potentially a lot of money, guard that stuff. Multi-factor authentication, I've got it with this website, which means not only do I have to log in with my username and password here, but I also have to, on my phone, it's got a number that I have to go back and put into here so that it links up so that Amazon knows that I am who I am. I don't worry about hackers getting into my account. Okay. So let's go ahead and finish this up. I'm going to go ahead and add storage. So once you have your server selected, you've got your network information selected, I can add as much storage as I like. I can add additional volumes. Those can be up into, once again, the terabytes again. I can choose the type, and you would choose the type because, for instance, SSD is going to be one of your more expensive options. The provisioned IOPS SSD will allow you to make that the interface much faster, but that's also much more expensive. And then you can go back down to something magnetic or hard disk drive if you really want to go back there. We're not going to do that. I'll hit next. Once again, add tags. Everything has tags associated with it. We'll add that. And configure security group. So that security group that we set up, now I can go ahead and create a new one here specifically for this server, or I can select an existing security group. Here's my IndyAWS public security group. I've already got my access set up, review and launch. Now, importantly, AWS gives you warnings, and they do this on a regular basis. So you'll see warnings that say, are you really sure you want to do this? They pay attention to best practices, and they pay attention to things that you could get yourself in trouble with, right? So here, they come up and say, this is not eligible for a free usage tier. They're saying, you're going to pay for this. And I can improve my security because right now it's open to the world. And awesome, I'm going to completely ignore them and launch that server. It will ask me for a key pair, so I can create use a key pair that I already have, or I can create a new one. Here I've already got one. I acknowledge that I have access to that key. And boom, so it's now launching, and I can get notified of any charges that are being presented, so they're telling me that here. Amazon has an incredible wealth of reporting. Anything that's happening on your servers, you can respond to that programmatically in AWS, or you can have AWS sending notifications out to email addresses, to other systems, etc. So we see that we've got our server, our instance ID. This is the availability zone we selected. It's initializing now. Once that comes up, I can connect to that server, interact with it just like I would any other server. So that is on the hardware side. AWS also has serverless architecture. The two options are server and serverless. If you get into serverless, and we're not going to talk about that today, but there are a lot of services that you can create that basically AWS is handling all of the hardware, all of the server, all of your upgrades, everything on the back end. Here I've created a server, which means I'm responsible for maintaining that server, upgrading it, etc. Okay, last thing we want to talk about. Stop it. AWS has a billing dashboard, and in the billing dashboard, they give you information about what you paid last month. You can go back and look at all of the costs that you incurred, and you can look at their forecast costs based on what you have going on right now for your current month. And I can go into those. I can click on this, or I can click Cost Explorer. They both do the same thing. And you'll see I have costs incurred June 1st, and then very few costs after that. And that doesn't tell me a whole lot of information, right? So I'm going to explore costs, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to break it down by service. You can also break it down by tags, which is one of the reasons for the value of those tags. And here, I happen to know, if I hover over this, developer support was a big chunk of that one, and then workspaces was another chunk of that. If I go in and select my services and go, okay, go down to developer support, and let's exclude that one. Now, my biggest top cost was workspaces. I'm actually going to go ahead and exclude that one as well. Services. Now I can start to see, oh, okay, so EC2, I can key management services. So I can start to see, drill down however we want to do that, to see this is on a daily basis. I can choose daily, I can choose monthly to see what my costs are. I can go back several months that way. Also down below, it's broken up the same way but in a grid. So for cost management, you have access to all of the information. You know what you're paying for. The nice thing is on a daily basis, I can set up something today. Tomorrow I can go back and say, okay, is this making sense? Is it what I expected? Now, last piece of information, if you want to know more. So for instance, how much is this service going to cost me? How to set things up, anything like that. If you go into, so we went to support and documentation. AWS has very good documentation on almost all of their services. So you can go in, if you're learning how to set something up, go to the documentation. If you want to understand something a little bit more in depth, go to the documentation. They also have links to outside resources. So this documentation is invaluable, especially when you're getting started and if you want to understand those systems. So this is the Google Authenticator. It's what AWS uses for their multi-factor authentication. On my phone, I see the numbers. You can have several listed for every account that you have multi-factor authentication in. So I choose the one that's for the active account, and I put that in. That's all that is. Best way to connect with me if you ever want to do that is look for Christopher Paul in Indianapolis. I no longer work at Lids, but if you look for this ugly mug, the mug is unique. So that's it. Any questions?
If you have any questions, I'll bring the microphone around to you so that we can get it on the recording. Somebody has a question, I promise you.
When you first got into the servers, they had server blueprints. Can you talk a little bit more about those?
No.
Okay.
I am not completely new to AWS, but there are people in here who have a lot more experience than I do. So I especially connect with one of these guys from 6 feet up, or connect with one of the other folks, and they can help you more than I can on those.